It's a swarm. A scorpion swarm. Hello and welcome to my channel Inch by Inch Art. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made my scorpion swarm blocks. I'm using this resin casting jewelry mold kit that I got. I have coincidentally noticed that one of the squares happens to be 1 inch by 1 inch in size, which is perfect for a tabletop RPG that I play. I'm just using a pasta machine rolled piece of Super Sculpey and pressing the bottom of the square mold onto it to get the dimensions as perfect as I can, and then using an X-Acto knife to cut the lines that I've just pressed in. This will ensure that my base that's going to have the scorpions sculpted onto it will fit perfectly in the mold. And on to making the stamps. What I'm doing here is a sort of reverse stamp making. I'm directly sculpting or imprinting the scorpions into my stamp. If you'd like to see how I make stamps, there's another video I dedicated specifically to this. It's the same kind of concept. There's several different ways to do this, but I decided to give this a try and see how it went, especially because the scorpions are so small. I thought this might be an easier way to go about it rather than trying to make little scorpion pieces and then do a mold off of those once I've baked them. Here's just me testing how it looks once I've pressed one out. I end up making 4 different scorpion molds, and I'm using my silicone sculpting tools and my dental pick and my ball styluses to do this. The idea here was that I wanted to be able to make a swarm that you could use on a map that you could put your character on top of, because I found that all swarms for sale are 3D and don't allow you to actually put your mini on top, even though in the games they can and do share the same space, because essentially the swarm is on your character. So I thought this was a really innovative, different way to make a swarm of scorpions that you could have your character share the same space with on the game board. Just gonna test fit my base again. I figured once it baked it may have shrunk a little bit, so I would just test it real quick. And I'm ready to start using my stamps. I use talcum powder. Ugh, I got it everywhere. Sorry. I use talcum powder or baby powder as a mold release. It helps especially when you have stamps that have really fine detail. Make sure that nothing sticks in there and you get a good impression. The clay that I'm using is Super Sculpey and Translucent Sculpey. I use the translucent a lot for stamps because it's very, very soft, so it tends to take details quite well. And here I am just using an X-Acto knife to remove the stamped scorpion as thinly as I can from the piece that I pressed into. You can see here I've got a ton of different scorpions ready. I think I did about a dozen of them. And I'm using liquid Sculpey Bacon Bond to use as a kind of glue and a bit of a base coat on my square base. Here I'm using my dotting tool to try and press on my little scorpions. I use my tools to sort of press out any excess and to push in detail that may have been lost, either in cutting the clay off of the piece that I stamped or just maybe that didn't quite stamp right. Because it's a swarm, I tried to get them really densely on there and have them overlap a little bit. And I'm ready to bake my scorpion mold. Test fit one more time, still looking good. And I think we're ready to make a mold of this. Just putting some blue tack on the bottom so that I can stick it to the bottom of one of these cups, where I'm gonna pour my 2-part smooth-on SORTA-Clear 37 silicone mold rubber onto the scorpions. This will make it so I can cast as many as I want using different materials. Here's my mold finished. And these are some examples of some failures. These were all UV resin that I tried to make in this mold. This one had a massive bubble appear in it. This one never cured properly and was still tacky for some reason. I think my UV flashlight might have been dying. Either that or my UV resin starting to go bad. So I decided to try Apoxie Sculpt instead. I've been using it on some pieces lately. I used it for my Chubby Tiger sculpt that you can watch in another video, and I thought maybe it would work well for this. So using my talcum powder again, for my mold release, I've dusted the inside of the mold and I'm just firmly pressing in the Apoxie Sculpt using an X-Acto knife to cut off any excess and pressing it in really firmly to ensure it gets good detail. After a few hours, it's cured and ready to be removed from the mold. You can see I got some really good detail on it. Here it is next to the original. And those are the earlier failures. And now I've decided I'm going to paint it. I feel pretty confident. I think it looks really good. Honestly, thinking back, I should have just done a test, but whatever, mistakes were made. Just using a brown wash to give it a dirt look around my different colored scorpions. And a black wash to boost the contrast. I liked how it was looking, but I wanted to boost the contrast a little bit more on the scorpions, so I did a white dry brush as well. Looking good. At this point, I think I'm ready to cast it, and I'm going to use UV resin, which I probably should have learned from before my UV resin was acting up and not done this, but I am really impatient, and I like how quickly UV resin works. Just using a pipette to make sure that it's as full as I can get it, and pressing it into the bottom, and using a lighter to pop any bubbles. Here I'm using my UV light. And as you can see, something weird just happened. I can't explain what this is. I assume it's some sort of chemical reaction. It looked great until it was almost done curing, and then all of a sudden this weird, sort of like a thin bubble appeared on top of the entire piece inside the resin. So I went back, thought things over, and decided I would use my epoxy doming resin. Even though it's a 2-part resin and it takes a full day to cure, it came out great. I am so glad that I redid it. I still used Apoxie Sculpt and the exact same way to make the scorpions. I still painted it with the same paint. I just used this different resin and let it sit and cure, and it came out really, really good. Here are all of my attempts, my original mold, my UV resin failures, just Apoxie Sculpt in UV resin, the one that got the weird bubble, a second try, still got a weird bubble. I basically just went a lot lighter with the UV light to see if it would help. Didn't help. This one was my first epoxy doming resin, but I didn't mix it right, so it's still a little tacky. This one was a fun experiment. I decided to cast resin in resin, and I didn't paint it as much. I thought it looked kind of like fossils, and I might play around with this concept more. I just won't be using this one because I missed a little spot in the corner with my paint. This is one with just solid colored scorpions. Had too many bubbles in it, so I wasn't happy with that one. And this is my final.